and institutions. I'm gonna look for my pen. This is Wednesday, February 12th. It's our 1 o'clock meeting. We're running a little late. We have with us the Vermont State Colleges. Sharon Scott, who's the Chief Financial and Operating Officer for the State College System. And thank you for coming, being willing.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
I know you were here last week and there was some more questions about the request, the governor's recommended amount. Got to get the right spreadsheet because I was looking at the old request for a reason. So we wanted you to go into a little bit more detail in terms of what would be included in the 1.5 million for your major maintenance and construction and renovation.
Absolutely.
That's been an ongoing appropriation over the years, but we have some new members here.
Right.
And also this is new in terms of its replacement of the central heat plant up in Johnson. So
Absolutely.
it's another 1.5 for FY 26 and then 3.5 million for FY 27. So I'd like to go over that as well. And I know that you also in your previous handout went through previous appropriation that we had for Green Hall and Vale Hall.
Correct.
And last year we knew that, was it Vale that wasn't gonna, Vale was not gonna go forward.
Correct.
So we pulled $1 million from the original 7.5. Because Vale was not going forward as previously planned. So I'd just like an update on that. I know that was in your document.
Yes.
That you submitted.
So based on that, I think we'll skip right to the Vale and Green Hall projects. Just as a quick update for you. So last year we had come to you and we had spoken about the Vale and Green Hall projects. The Vale Hall project, which is located on the Linden campus, is a relatively historical building. It was reconstructed in 1976. And the intent with our project was to actually deal with the inner mechanical and plumbing and related activities. So we had initially requested $3 million for that work. As we got into the work and we're starting to look at a little bit of the infrastructure, we identified that there were potentially some structural issues with the building, with settling related to it, that required us to really consider whether this is a project that made sense for us or not. We were also going through a master planning exercise and looking at that said, if we have settling and we're doing a master planning exercise, perhaps this is a building that is better to place on hold than it is to look at it elsewhere. So with that, we had made a request to divert $2 million of the funds from that project back to the Green Hall project. Green Hall is the science building, is a major technology and science building at the Randolph campus of Vermont State University. And that it too also needed major upgrades related to the electrical, mechanical, and plumbing related activities. That project we identified originally at 1.6 million. And when we got further into that, we realized that the structural and mechanical issues were significantly greater than we'd anticipated. So that $2 million was necessary in order to be able to allow us to complete that project. We have subsequently continued to work on that particular project based on your approval of that. And identified some additional items that we wanted to address from a deferred maintenance that weren't directly related to mechanical, electrical, and HVAC systems for about another $600,000. And we pulled our own funds in to be able to do that. That project is currently out on the street right now for bidding, and the work will be fully concluded by this summer. So
you have about 4.1 million for that?
It is 3.6 plus, yes, it's about 4.1.
4.1.
Yes.
Your bid package is out.
It is.
I'm gonna know what those bids are.
It's due back within another 1 to 2 weeks. If I remember correctly, I think it's due by the 28th. And so we'll have a much stronger idea exactly where we'll be. But we've been working very closely with the individuals, contractors within our area, and fingers crossed, it will stay within that budget. If it does not, we will secure funds from our internal self-funding pool in order to be able to finish that. It's important for us to be able to make sure that that particular facility, because it supports the tech programs within Vermont State University is upgraded to be able to allow them to continue to do their work. It's really been hampering their ability to be able to get their work done these last, I would say, probably 10 years. So we're really excited that that's going to be concluded. And we're excited that it'll be done by this summer. Fingers crossed, assuming we can get contractors.
Sorry. And then Vail,
So
you're just still on hold and you.
we are. The great news about Vail, with the conclusion of the master plan, we did go back and redo some analysis, brought in some contractors to really look very clearly at what we were seeing as settling issues. And the great news is I've been assured that that is not the problem that they thought it was. And so we will schedule that for a project at a future date, but it is currently on hold.
Really what?
It's on hold right now. We will not be doing any additional work on it right now.
Yeah, so is that building being used?
Yes, it is.
Vail.
The Vail.
Yes, it is currently being used. It's used for admissions offices, administrative offices, some classroom space. And it has some student services spaces within it as well, but it is being used.
Okay, so just administration mostly.
Mostly administration. There are a couple of classrooms in there and faculty offices, but it's mostly administration.
Okay, thanks.
Has a beautiful view of the pond
Mhm.
from that
You
building.
can see, yeah.
It's quite gorgeous.
How old is that building? Because it doesn't look that old.
1976.
Really?
So,
It's in the 70s.
yeah, so that is the 1976 building. The original Vail Hall was from Theodore Vail, the original founder of AT&T, the precursor of AT&T. And that is the first building that was used for the Linden campus when it moved up to that particular location. It had to be torn down because of significant settling issues. I think that's what made us all very anxious when we were finding what we thought were similar issues and said, let's put a stop to this until we know exactly what's going on.
Just a general, so Shauna just asked, but what percentage is occupied of that building? Is it 100% occupied, 80%, 70%?
I don't have that at my fingertips, but I can certainly get that for you. I don't have it at my fingertips.
But it's not fully occupied.
So I would say it's not fully occupied.
Okay.
I think that that's fair to say. When I was based at that location 6 years ago, it wasn't fully occupied at that point. So it wouldn't surprise me that it's not fully occupied.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we got that. Any more questions?
So as you know, Chair Emmons, we are really trying to find ways to be able to focus on getting the funding that we need in order to be able to take care of our deferred maintenance, to be able to expand our offerings where we need to. And so we've really focused a lot of attention the last few years on trying to build our own internal resources to be able to self-fund where we can. That was extraordinarily difficult for many, many years when things were extremely dire. And even for the 10 years preceding that, it was extremely difficult for us to be able to do so. And it's not that it's easy for us now, but what we recognize is that an organization that is not investing in its physical assets, whether that's our buildings and our grounds, our computing technology, is actually really setting itself up for failure. So we have very actively been working with our board and our institutions to start setting funds aside to be able to self-fund things where you can. So what you'll see is that as we move forward with deferred maintenance, this past year, we actually put about $2.5 million of our own funds into deferred maintenance activities, plus the $600,000 that we put in for Green Hall. That's not funding that we would have put in previous years. And this is really something that we're really working actively to set funds aside to be able to do that, not just to fund debt service if we have a bond, but actually to be able to invest in ourselves to make sure that our buildings are there. The same is true for looking for outside agencies. So we have 2 congressionally designated spending awards, one in the amount of $6.3 million to fund an expansion, both a capital and equipment expansion for our nursing programs to allow us to be able to have more nursing seats And then an additional $5.9 million for the same kind of efforts to be able to expand our dental hygiene program. Both of those efforts are critical to the workforce in Vermont. And because we were able to really seek congressionally designated spending for that, it means it's not funds that we have to come back to you and try and ask you for, because we know that expanding nursing and dental hygienists are two very critical things for here in the state of Vermont. So what we are asking for is major maintenance and a project at Jeffords Hall and a project at Johnson. The Jeffords Hall project at Castleton, it does some similar work to what we're doing in Green Hall. It's really focusing on the electrical and mechanical systems, and the campus heating system is to replace the full heating at the Johnson campus. All of our projects that we're really focused on are really focused on critical life safety and accessibility and deferred maintenance type needs. And so what I've shared for you, and I think it was handed out to you, is a spreadsheet of the kinds of things that our physical plant team has pulled together for what they anticipate. And this is actually how we devised our request for major maintenance for this upcoming biennium. What are the needs that you see that we have for each of these 2 years? So you have a sheet that looks like this that outlines the different kinds of activities that we're doing. Now, for major maintenance, because often it's unforeseen and we may have, so you'll see, for example, roof replacements, and it's many roofs beyond useful life, and it's one roof per campus that we're looking at in order to be able to do that. Right now, they have a list, a prioritized list of which roofs it would be starting this summer. But that list can change, as we all know, within the next 6 to 8 weeks as we start to see some thaw. That roof that we plan right now may very well be a different roof because it's more critical that we take care of that right now. This list was actually created last fall in preparation for our budget request. I could ask them to prepare another one. But what they are identifying is that for the work that they know they need to be able to accomplish, it's about $5 million a year. And as they look at that, when we make our request to you, we were asking for 3.6, recognizing that we are putting away our own funds to help address some of our own deferred maintenance. We know it's a huge ask, but these are the kinds of things that we know have to happen. Unfortunately, I was based at the Johnson and Linden campuses, but I know the same happened at Randolph and Castleton as well. As soon as it starts to thaw and then it freezes again, we will have a water main that breaks. And that is easily $75,000 to fix, right? Like that. It's just, of course, a matter of living in the state of Vermont. Those are the kinds of things that we're facing in terms of the work that needs to be done.
But this is the sheet you just submitted,
Yes.
that these are the projects that you're anticipating for FY '26 as
And
well as
FY27.
FY '27.
Yes.
So when you submitted your budget request back in the fall to the governor, did you request the 3.6 million?
We requested the total pool. Yes, we did request the 3.6.
The 3.6 and the 4.3.
Yes.
And how, if you only get to 1.5, how are you going to delineate what projects go?
We will conduct triage. It really comes down to triage. If the roofs are the greatest need, we will address the roofs. If the issue is that we have 5 water main breaks instead of what we normally estimate as 2 or 3, we will take care of those 5 water main breaks. Because what we deal with first is making sure that as much as possible, we have heat, we have lights, we have water. And then beyond that, it's maintaining the building envelope. It is really about Maslow's hierarchy. It is not about that we have excess funds to be able to do fun things with them. And as I talk with my team, I remind, you're going to paint the wall, that's great. Do it out on your own time. This money is for the essential needs of the organization, to make sure that our students are safe and warm. That's the most important thing.
So what I'm seeing here is Um, you've got HVAC repairs. Is that throughout the whole system or is that just at Castleton?
No, what they're estimating, the Castleton campus is a little bit larger, so they're estimating $100,000 a year for the Castleton campus, and then $75,000 for each of Randolph, Linden, and Johnson, and then $25,000 for the Williston campus because it's so small.
That's 200.
So it's not to complete something in 1 year, it's a multi-year
So
place.
yeah, so it would likely be what we would end up doing is do either smaller things within each campus location, or it would be multi-year, and we would decide for 1 to 2 years. It's very typical for us to say, okay, we're earmarking this very large project for this location over here, so we're going to earmark for 2 years of the biennium. We're going to take 2 years worth of that funding, and we're going to set that aside, and we're going to fund this larger effort over. But the estimate was based on what they see as their major maintenance relative to each one. So it's not every pump or motor or minor infrastructure in HVAC related to Castleton. It may be 2 buildings at Castleton. It might only be 1 building at Castleton. But recognizing that the Castleton campus is larger, it has some needs that are greater than the other campus locations.
So I guess I'm a little confused in that, and I'm just using the HVAC repairs as an example. Also, I see the same thing for boilers and chillers, so the pumps, motors, and minor infrastructures for all campuses. So we have the anticipated cost of $350 for 26 and $350 for 27, but in the comments, it only comes up to 200,000. You got 100K for Castleton, 75
Each.
okay, each. that's
Yeah,
from that.
that's
Times
Okay,
Times 3.
Okay, so there you go. Sorry.
If I'd had a little bit more time before I'd submitted it, I would have extrapolated it out a
We
little
get
bit.
it. So your priority, you've got HVAC, boiler chillers, roof, building upgrades, elevator upgrades, exterior upgrades, and unforeseen. So this is your total wish list.
This is our total wish list. And when we look at what does this list include, the things that have to be replaced, we have to do roofs. We have to do boilers and chillers. We have to do HVAC. The elevators, if we want to continue to use them, we have to do the elevators. In many cases, our elevators are original to the building. And in order to be able to use them, we need to make significant repairs or upgrades to them. The exterior upgrades are, taking care of failing sidewalks. It's not saying we're going to paint the exterior of the building per se. It's the failing sidewalk. It's the parking lots that are crumbling or have huge humps in them if you've been on some of our campuses. So these are the things that we're looking at. And then certainly the unforeseen things, those things are the emergencies that we just have to take care of.
So I'm not gonna be nitpick, but I just am saying this for the committee to get a perspective here. When we do markup, what to really start looking at. So if you go over this sheet for the committee, your priorities, you're saying are the boilers and chillers, roof replacement, elevators. Okay, I mean, the others are important, but if you have to triage,
Right.
depending.
Emergencies.
Emergencies,
Yeah.
depending what happens, okay? You've got the 350. You've got 400 for roofs, and you got elevators at 400, so you're at 1.1 million for those 3 items. That's not including steam and water distribution lines. That's something completely different. But for those 3 priorities, that could be emergencies. Anticipated cost for 26 is 350 for boilers and chillers, 400,000 for roofs, and it's 400 for elevators. You add that up and it's about 1.1 million. Let's put that, let people know. And
Yep.
there's 1.5 that the governor has put in. Not to slam you, but
Oh, no.
just to show the committee the process in terms of when we do markup, what you need to look at. In terms of how far does that 1.5 go, or do you try to bump it up? Meet more needs, or do you cut it back? Will, you had your hand up.
Well, I want to go back to that 1.1 million figure. But when you said that, were you, I mean, because it's ranked here kind of in the same way, I just don't know if that matters at all when we're considering that. Well, because you said, boiler, roof, and then HVAC, but here it's like HVAC, boiler, roof. I don't think that really matters.
I asked her what the priorities were.
And that's,
It was making sure the building is heated, making sure the roof isn't leaking, and making sure the elevators are working.
okay. And the elevators, okay.
And emergencies,
And what?
and the emergencies.
Okay.
Just to, so people, even though there's a big ask, yeah, the committee needs to drill down into that big ask and compare it to what the governor has put in the budget. So we can figure out when we do markup, do we stay with what the governor recommended? Do we try to find more or do we cut it back? Sean?
So with the sidewalks and roadways and parking lots, because I see that as, lawsuits
Right.
waiting to happen. Are those sidewalks and roadways and parking lots things that you can cut off, like you can shut them off, or do you need those sidewalks to access to buildings and stuff? And is it for ADA compliance?
So we need them in many cases, they're for ADA compliance. There may be an entrance to a building that is only on a flat area
Yep.
that's got that one sidewalk. Even if you are in a position where you say, we can just cut that off, you really have to dig up the sidewalk for it not to be used, because otherwise it's a public nuisance, and then you're still subject to the lawsuits. We have issues that we've had occur on our campuses where the parking lots have been in such disrepair that it's damaged vehicles that we've had to take care of.
Correct.
And then it's very difficult for us to just shut off a parking lot when it's right next to a building. And that makes it a challenge. The challenge that we have is while if I had to triage, that's where I would triage. If we have 1.5 million, that's where we will have to triage. But what it means is that we have a crumbling infrastructure around us that until we have all of our own funds where we could do all of it, and I'm not sure that we'll ever be in that position, that crumbling infrastructure makes it difficult for us to be able to operate. It makes it difficult to sell the campus to prospective students, or when you have guests on campus. It makes it hard to be able to be in that position to really present the education in a way that it should be presented. That being said, if we have to triage, we will triage, and we have for many years, and we will do so. It's because that's what we have to do.
Kevin and then Troy?
I want to say this in a proper fashion, but I was excited when I saw that slide, alternative funding. If the governor hadn't recommended any funding, how would you account for what needs to be done?
So that 2.5 million that we spent this year, which augmented the funds that we received from you, would be the only funds that we'd be able to use to be able to get the work done. And I can't guarantee that I have 2.5 million. We knew we have about 1 to 1.5 million for next year when we made this budget. But that's where we would be, is we would work within our means. That's what we do in the Vermont State Colleges, is we try to work within our means as much as possible. But it does mean that with an infrastructure, that infrastructure becomes deferred maintenance. That is more and more, until at a certain point, you're unable to recover from that. And that's a place that the Vermont State Colleges doesn't really want to be in, if we can help it.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
So,
I guess I'm showing my naivety. There are no other alternative funds that you can dip into other than letting it break down.
well, as I said, we're using some of our own funds for some of that work now. And that has been hard come over these last few years. Other sources of funding come from sources like bonding or loans, et cetera. The Vermont State Colleges is not currently in a position where it can bond. It's probably 5 to 10 years away from being in a position, whereas the CFO of the system, I would be comfortable having us bond right now. We are still working our way out of a structural deficit that has been a long time in the making, and working really closely with you as the legislature these last 4.5 years, we are not completely out of the woods yet. And even when we get to the very closest edge and we're on, in bright sunshine, it's still going to be a few years before I'm going to be comfortable saying, I want to get some loans. We're a few years away.
So one last time and then I'll get
Sure.
off of it. My ignorance is there aren't things like endowments
Mm-hmm.
that are available
No.
to supplement the needs.
So endowments are legal contracts that we have with the donors, and those endowments are in the Vermont State Colleges, 99% dedicated to student scholarship. Our donors are largely teachers and the alums of our system who want to help the students who are like them when they went to school. And so we have $37 million in endowment, but virtually none of it can be used for any purpose other than student scholarship.
Thank you.
Right, and then James.
Can you just spend a brief amount of time I'm just looking at your request.
Sure.
Considering, if you were able to do all of this, how long would it take you? What have you noticed with the labor force? How easy is it to get a project started? Supply chain, have you done any forecasting on that as compares to these specific?
Right. So we are experiencing internally a very difficult time hiring within the Vermont State Colleges, particularly in our trades and in our employees that are as part of the VSBA. So they are largely mechanical, clerical, technical workers. And because of the way that their salary is constructed, it makes it very difficult for us to pay a competitive wage. We are working with our collective bargaining unit now and hoping that we can come to agreement at some point in the future that would allow us to be able to restructure their compensation to be able to make it a little bit more competitive. But we're also obviously struggling with getting the contractors that we need in order to be able to supplement the work. And when we do, it's expensive, which is one of the reasons why some of these prices are as high as they are. As you know, Chair Emmons, we have a big thing out on the street right now. We're hoping that we estimated high enough and that there is the workforce available to do the work. The good news is on one front is that at each of our campus locations, we do have some pretty strong partnerships, particularly with plumbing and electrical contractors who are able to help us, as well as some roofing contractors that we've worked with for decades. But that doesn't mean that they're going to instantly.
So what's your pragmatic, honest, objective take on how quickly you could move $8 million if you got your entire request?
I think it will take, we proposed a portion of the Johnson Heating Plant project to be planning and design. And so I think we're perfectly capable of being able to do that. For the remainder for major maintenance, that work is regularly scheduled and in progress already. So I feel like we can do that. We purposely proposed the heating plant and the Jeffords Hall projects have planning and design in the first year so that we could be rapidly available to be able to deploy in the second year. But we needed that time to be able to make sure that we had all the documents necessary to be able to do that.
Trying to think of how to word it. I'm not advocating for anything. But it seems like I know you're going through a process and the college system was in rough shape, let's say, was or is. And some of us had asked different questions about occupancy rates, and last time you were here, we did as well.
Sure.
With the amount of cost, is there any more consideration to further consolidation? Because I don't know, or is money going to come, like, are you expecting some great change in the financial situation that's going to make, let's say we gave 8 million, which is probably.
We ain't doing it because we.
Well, I was trying to be generous, but I mean, we don't have the money, that's a fact. That this will be, let's pretend we did though, that it's not an ongoing problem, or is there like, so I know this is not like say St. Mike's or even UVM or whatever, which is, it's a state college. But like obviously St. Mike's takes care of their own buildings. They take care of their own parking lot, et cetera. So I do know it's different, but like they have to get funds from somewhere. So I'm curious of how your funds and the endowment, I understand, it's obviously targeted to certain ways. Maybe there's creative ways to use that for scholarship and then money that would be in a budget from somewhere else, moving money. You guys are way above me on that, but I'm just like, just so many things that you have to deal with every day. I'm well aware. That doesn't make financial sense from this side or as a business owner. And I guess it's just about not understanding what the real plan is for right sizing and moving into the future in a much more sustainable way.
So our chancellor is working really closely with the president of Vermont State University and the communities where each of our institution locations are housed. So Johnson, Linden, Castleton, Randolph, a little bit less in Williston because it's such a small footprint. But she's working really closely with them to understand more effectively how might some of the resources that are on those campuses be used differently. So not to eliminate education at a location. We have a very clear mandate to maintain presences at each of these physical existing locations. But how can we consider taking advantage of the existing assets that we have? How can we do some things where we can maybe turn some things where more cash could come in that might dedicate itself towards renovation or doing other work? That's work that's ongoing right now. And I don't have an answer for you specifically, but I can tell you that those conversations that are happening in those communities is incredibly creative and has the opportunity to be able to really look at how can we right size. Education in these rural communities is so important. It's so vital to have these campus locations where you have the opportunity to be able to get an education. While many of our students are choosing to take their education flexibly, they're doing some work online, they might be coming into class some days, they may be taking classes from different campus locations at the same time. Those centers of excellence related to education, something for those communities that allows them to blossom in a way that they wouldn't were they not there. So we're committed to being in those locations, but how we use some of the buildings, if they're underutilized, how we use some of the parking lots, if we can. Is there a way that we can take advantage of some of those things? Is all work that's ongoing right now.
So just like from my own experience, I would say, I didn't go. I went somewhere else for school. Like Williston is probably the best nursing in the state program in the state, even compared to what was on the actual Vermont Tech campus back in the day. And yes, it's the same school, but everybody I've ever met who's been through nursing will say when they're in the program that the VTC back in the day program there, but that's a simple building that we're renting, I believe, right?
No, we own this.
We own it now.
Yep.
But compared to a traditional, the college buildings, these big buildings. So when I'm thinking about re-envisioning, I'm thinking about places like that. I don't know what the costs are there either. I'm just in my head going, that's gotta cost less than this big monstrous building. And, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. That's
right. The challenge with our campus locations is honestly, when we look at how much square footage we own almost 2 million square feet for the Vermont State colleges. That's a lot of square footage. And so we have to be really creative about what we do with that square footage that we have. Do we continue to own all of it? Do we continue to have all those buildings? Do we find a way to do a long-term lease to someone else for part of them? That's all work that's ongoing right now, but it's different for every community. Williston is a little bit different animal because it's right there in Chittenden County, but it's different in every community because the needs for every community are fundamentally different, and finding those partnerships with that community is what we're focusing on right now.
John, did you?
To the extent that testimony wouldn't prejudice possible negotiations with other parties, is it possible to get a more granular game plan for the Johnson campus? And I only say that specifically because that's where a large capital request lies. And And it may not be possible for,
I don't think you're ready.
Unfortunately, we're not ready yet.
okay.
Not ready. So I want to go back to your major maintenance here, because I just want to be clear on this sheet here, because when we do markup for the committee, when we do markup, we look at the 1.5 and the 1.5 and then what they're requesting. We have to base our decisions on something. So you would triage on this list, okay? And it would be boilers, because you need heat, roof replacements, could be water mains, who knows, elevators. Now, this, for the campus, it says all, okay? So you could have a roof in one, you could have a boiler in another, and you could have an elevator in another. But what you're anticipating, if it was a roof replacement for all of your campuses, and you had to do that all at once, 400,000. You're anticipating 100,000 per roof
Yes.
for that. And the same with elevators. It's 400,000. If they all your elevators went at all your campuses, it'd be 400,000.
Yes.
It's what you're anticipating. So that's what we need to weigh, committee, when we're looking at that 1.5 million. If everything went at all the facilities all at once, again, you'd be at 1.1. And I just want to clarify, did I hear that you also have about $1 million to $1.5 million of your own money
Yes.
that you could put towards this?
Yes, which is why we're not requesting the full 5 million that is listed on each year of the biennium.
Okay. Because between the 1.5 and your 1 to 1.5, you're at 2.5 to 3 million that you can put towards your major maintenance. Not that you want to use all of your $1 to $1.5 million internal money. So that's the balance, committee, that we need to figure when we do markup. I just want to put that all out on the table.
Yep.
For folks to think about. Now, I know we talked about the financial situation that the whole system was in a few years ago. There was quite a bit of infusion of state dollars into that to really help you. A lot of that came from the general fund. Was it as 10 million?
So the bridge funding varied from year to year. In the first year, it was $28.8 million. It was 28.8, 21, 15, 10, and we're requesting.
And that's in the general fund.
That is in the general fund. In some cases, that was funded through COVID dollars. Largely, they were funded through COVID grants.
So it's to help their transformation, their bridge in terms of keeping the colleges open
Okay.
and then also working towards transformation.
Right.
Well, it was just real bird's eye view. What were those projects? 20 million, 10, 20, 50,
They weren't-
28 million.
That was bridge
It
funding.
was bridge to keep them going.
That was to keep the.
It was
Keep
just
the lights
cash.
on.
Like
Keep the
operating
lights on.
costs.
It wasn't from us. It was
Wow.
from the appropriations committee, the general.
This is the last year that is.
Gotcha.
We're making the request this year for the last year,
Yeah.
$5 million.
5 year.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. That wasn't maintenance. That was just
No.
running the business.
Yeah.
Going.
Because
they were on.
had you given
They were on the
$28 million
Yeah.
in capital, we would be having a very different
Think of it
conversation.
as ledger maintenance.
Gotcha. Thank you. I didn't realize that.
Yes.
I mean, I kind of heard it when it was happening in the newspapers and stuff, but
So we are making, it was a 5-year plan that began in 4 years ago. And so we are making our request this year for the last $5 million tranche of bridge funding with the expectation, so that's for FY26. And the expectation is that we will present a balanced budget for FY27. And if for some reason there's some difference in that, it would be self-funded by the Vermont State Colleges and not by the legislature. So our expectation is that that is what we are moving forward with.
Go ahead.
yeah. So follow-up question. So obviously it's coming around. You are making money, right? Or like big
We-
picture.
We are nearing
They're
making money.
stabilized.
So we have stabilized
Okay, good.
enough to be able to say, So we've made some very, very significant structural changes. Previously, we had Johnson State College and Linden State College, Vermont Technical College and Castleton University. Johnson and Linden had merged into Northern Vermont University, and we subsequently have merged Northern Vermont University with Vermont Technical College in Castleton to form Vermont State University. What does that do for us? What it does for us is it allows us to have a single administrative structure. You have a single president and chief business officer, provost, et cetera. But it's allowed us to be able to also consolidate academic programs. So you have academic programs and departments that cross multiple campus locations. The business department is at multiple campus locations.
Gotcha.
With faculty in each place, but you only have one department manager. You only have one organizational structure that's doing it. It's allowing us to eliminate duplication of effort in a lot of cases. So when we look at those things, that's just one small example. It's not really a small example, it's a large example, but it's those kinds of changes that we have made. So in FY20, 63% of our total budget, our total actual expenses went to wages and benefits. In the most recently completed year, FY24, 57% went. So 6% change. In actual dollars, it's $11 million less. Actual dollars when you go from FY20 to FY24. And that's when we have planned wage increases and benefit increases that ran into the high single and into the low double digits for each of those years. So to see an actual dollar savings of $11 million related to that comes from an enormous amount of hard work by the Vermont State Colleges. So we have taken very seriously this need to right our fiscal ship. We just proposed the first preliminary budget to our Board of Trustees on Monday. And in that, we have a target deficit of $5 million, hence the $5 million bridge funding. The budget that we proposed, the preliminary one so far in the first pass, the preliminary version, is $6.3 million. So we're within $1.3 million of hitting the target. They have 2 more bites at the apple over the course of our budgeting process. But by the time we hit our June board meeting, and we will hit it. But it's work that they have to keep focusing intense attention on, simultaneously also increasing our investment in facilities, increasing our investment in the replacement of computing equipment. When we started this process, we had individuals with computers, some of them sitting on their desks that were 15 years old, literally. So we are now really taking a really strong hold on saying, how do we not only right our ship, but also make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success for the next 2 decades. When I retire at some point, I want to leave this place better than I found it. I feel like I'm leaving it right now. I'm running it better than I found it. But I really want to make sure that when I leave in 10 years, that it's still in a really great place.
And how are, I'm sorry, just quick follow-up, numbers, kids coming into school that are, students. Is that on an upswing? Is it flatlined? Is it going down? How's
So
that?
we saw a pretty significant decrease between 2019 and the fall of 2023. And that was due to a bunch of different factors. The pandemic had a huge play in that. But another major factor is every time you change a name and you have a whole huge upheaval about merging different things, the market gets really squirrely and says, I'm not really sure about this. And so we saw some pretty significant declines in new student enrollment during that period. This past fall, Vermont State University actually saw a 14% increase in its new starts from the previous year. Now, I'd love to say that means they're profitable, but what that means is you have 3 years of classes behind you that are still really low. So it takes several years of eating the apple to actually refill. But what we're looking at right now is likely to be between 9 and 12% increase in new starts again this fall. And that's, while we do have a significant demographic issue here in Vermont and New England and the Northeast, what we are working toward is actually recovering back our market share. So we had lost market share because of some discomfort in the market. It's now about recovering that market share in Vermont, New England. And what we're really finding is that the name Vermont State University plays really, really well. People like Vermont. Out-of-state people like Vermont. And it gives you some instant cachet that when we were independent individual little institutions, they had some history, which was great, but they didn't have the name Vermont in them. And this makes a huge difference.
So let's move on, because I'm looking at the time.
Sure.
So Jeffords Hall. And this is not in the governor's
This
recommends.
is not in the governor's recommends. Jeffords Hall is a project to do some work that's very similar to what we were doing at Green Hall. It is the primary science building at the Castleton location. It consumes an enormous amount of energy through its air exchanges because it has all of that stuff to deal with the labs. But its mechanical and electrical and plumbing systems are really underpowered for the needs. It's an old building and it makes it really difficult for our students to have the level of education that they need. While a brand new building would be something that we would love to do, this would allow us to be able to do the essential work that we need to at that particular location. So we're proposing updating the mechanical and electrical and plumbing systems, and it will increase operational efficiency, reduce deferred maintenance related to those things. And it'll also increase building uptime because we have a lot of downtime that happens because something will fail and we won't be able to use certain labs or other parts of the building. So we have the total project estimate is 5.6 million. And we had proposed allocating $923,000 of that in year one to do the planning and design work ahead of being able to have bid documents and have things bid out for the following year, the biennium.
You do planning and design in FY 26, and that's what the 923 before that gets you ready to go out to construction.
In FY 27, yes.
You're anticipating 4.672 million for construction.
Yes.
Have you reached out to Efficiency Vermont at all in terms of the HVAC and your electrical?
We work with them frequently. I don't know that they've done so specifically on this project.
Questions? Okay, let's go to the campus heating up in Johnson.
So our last project that we had proposed is the replacement of the campus heating system at the Johnson location. It is a nearly 60-year-old building, and that central heating plant is original to the building itself. It's
Located on the
Arthur
campus.
Hall.
It's in Arthur?
It's in
I
Arthur.
went to Johnson.
Yes, I know. So it's in Arthur Hall. It's in the basement of Arthur. And it serves about 90% of the campus's heating needs. There's one science building that is not served by it, and then the college apartments are not served by it. The plant itself is in pretty fragile condition, and our parts for it are really hard to come by. And we know that it's living on borrowed time and that the risk of catastrophic failure when it's heating 90% of the campus makes it a challenge. So we're proposing replacing the central heating plant itself to improve the reliability of it, lower the costs, and enhance some energy efficiency. That being said, we are proposing it with the same fuel, which is number 2 heating oil, in this exact same location. We would love to propose it as an alternative fuel source, but our original estimate for that would place the cost at least half as, again, it's as high. And we really didn't feel like we could ask for that amount of funding for making that happen. That being said, we do plan to investigate whether maybe our estimates are wrong. We'll investigate alternative fuel options and really dive in with Efficiency Vermont in terms of looking at how much rebate we can get. And if we can do so, we would far prefer using an alternative fuel source other than number 2. But looking at what we thought was realistic, and I know our budget request is not necessarily realistic sounding. It is $8 million total, with 1.6 million in the first year to do the planning and the design and investigatory work to be able to prepare to have things out on the street for the following year, recognizing that much of the equipment is going to require some pretty lengthy lead times if we're replacing it.
James.
So not to belabor this point, but of that campus, you said 90% is seated by this plant.
Yes.
What percentage of that 90% is occupied versus not occupied?
So we have about 196 students living in the residence halls right now at that particular campus. That's about 40% occupancy in the residence halls themselves. That campus has always had a pretty high proportion of students who live off campus and who take their classes on campus. It's just always been the way. It's been more of a commuter style campus rather than living on campus. It's one of the smaller campus locations relative to that. And so it's also the location where we are expanding out a large component of the nursing expansion in order to be able to offer professional development and incumbent workforce training for nurses coming from Franklin County, Chittenden County, and the surrounding Lamoille County and other areas. So that location is about 40% occupied in terms of residency, but then the remainder are academic classrooms, administrative offices, et cetera.
So how many dorms are operating? Is it Arthur, governors, senators?
They're running Arthur's, governors, and senators. Martinetti is not being used as a residence hall right now. It's largely administrative space at the moment.
It was part and part when I was there. Part. So tell me again,
What do you mean by part?
it was part administrative and part
Oh,
dorm.
okay.
So, and I was there probably when this heat plant was brand new. Hate to say that, but that's probably when I was there. So 90%, again, what is it that this plant does not heat?
It does not heat the Bentley Science Building,
Okay.
and it does not heat the college apartments. So the college
Okay.
apartments, as you might be,
They're off campus.
so they're essentially off campus.
Yeah.
They're really far away. And I'm not sure why Bentley, I think back then, it was at a specific time where at one point electric heat was considered en vogue. And
60s and 70s.
yeah, so that building is electric heat, which is not great. We could do some conversions in the late, like 2008, 2009 to put in some individual gas propane heat, but in general, it is electric in that particular location, which is less than ideal. The college apartments themselves are largely heated today with Rinnai heaters. There is still a little bit of electric heat there.
So the 1.5 would give you planning and design, and you're anticipating that the project cost for construction is 6.4, and you're anticipating you'd be able to go out to construction in FY 27.
That's what we're anticipating, yes.
How much this heating plant, has it failed a lot lately?
I would have to go back and check. I was there for 17 years. It failed pretty frequently over those 17 years. So I would say yes, but I can get you a more firm answer.
I would really. It's too bad that there isn't some ability to look at a different alternative to number 2 fuel, because once you put in a new heating system like this, it's gonna be here for a good number of years.
Right.
I'm just wondering if there could be, other monies to look to help put in a different type of system or a combination system.
Right.
I mean, for folks who haven't been to Johnson, it's up on a hill and it's really, really cold. It gets the wind all the time,
Always.
all the time. So you do need a good heating system up there. It's just, I hate to lock us in so much with number 2 fuel oil.
Mhm.
And I get it, you're gonna have to do that, but I'm just wondering if there's some other alternative as well to help with that.
Right, right. We do anticipate doing some investigation. Our real concern is where are we going to get the extra $4 or $5 million that might be needed? That being said, we've not done a firm estimate on looking at an alternative fuel. The challenge is for the particular building that we're looking at, in order to be able to make this work, we need to have all of the heating come through that location because all the lines run around the campus from there. It's built on the side of a hill. And so there's space down the hill, but not within the building. It's a dormitory building. So there isn't space to be able to push other things in. So we've thought about it. In fact, over the years when I was their Dean of Administration, we looked at potentially putting biofuels in, and had some ideas and proposals about how to make that happen. It all involves building another building
Right.
in order to be able to make that happen.
Then you wouldn't be able, would you be, if you did that, would you be able to tie into the current piping system?
We think so. We think that there's a space, I'm going back in my memory banks. It's been a while since I've been there, but when I was there, it was putting it across the road. So if we look at this particular location, it's kind of at the top of a little bit of a hill. There's a road that goes beside it, and then there's an embankment. The idea would be to put it through the road and then put the building, essentially build it into the side of the building there and put the building there. So we could then run the piping through and into Arthur Hall and then extend throughout the campus locations from that. So you could reconstruct everything. So that had been the plan and idea that we'd considered back then. But it's been a long time. That was probably in my first 5 or 6 years that I was there. So 2007, 2008, maybe. It's been a while since we've looked at it. And obviously since then, we've had concerns about how we were going to afford things.
So how recent are these numbers that you've put up there for the $8 million cost? How recent?
They were constructed early last fall.
Questions? Planning and design.
There's no 10-year plan. I'm just worried about this. Your request was 8, you got 5, and then there's no 10-year plan. I don't have a question. I'm just.
Governor didn't include it. It's a 10-year plan.
So we do, there are multiple campus heating systems that need replacing. And we talked about which one did we want to propose, because we can't propose everything in 1 year. Those two, of the 2 locations, we felt that the Johnson location not only had the greatest need, but then based on the preliminary understanding of our master plan and where we were heading and the work that we were doing at that location, the expansion of the nursing program, et cetera, that this was the project that made the most sense to propose. That being said, we have many campus locations for which a heating system replacement would be ideal. The Randolph location, which operates on number 4 fuel, the Castleton location, which also operates on number 4, and then the Linden location, which operates on number 2. They all are of a similar vintage. Some are experiencing more problems than others. This happens to be one that is experiencing some significant issues. This one in the Randolph location.
And this uses number 2 or 4?
This is number 2. Johnson is number 2.
That cleaner than 4?
Yes.
Yeah.
If we were making a proposal to replace at Randolph or Castleton, we would not make a proposal like for like. At best, at worst, it would be number 2. It's not in good conscience. Can you replace with number 4?
Gotcha.
Anything else?
Probably true.
Well, this has been very helpful. I'm not making any promises on anything when we do markup. We just don't know where we're gonna end up.
I really understand. You have a lot of very difficult choices ahead of you.
Very helpful. Take everything under consideration.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And let me know if I can give any further assistance.
Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So do we have Jennifer on Zoom? Oh, she's here. Good.
Better.
It's even better. I'm just so used to seeing you on Zoom. I'm sorry, we're running a little late, but it's what it is. So we're gonna keep working here because we also have something at 2:30. I'm wondering, Phil, if we run a little over, is if they could come in, Ron Arts Council could just come in after the floor. We don't have much on the floor today. We should be done by 3:30.
I can check.
Yeah, just in case we go over for that. Okay, so we're gonna shift gears here.
You'd be all right.
Yeah, we'll be on. Yep. So we're gonna shift gears and talk about the victim notification system. So Jennifer, if you could come on up. I know last week the committee heard from both victim in the victim notification system, both with DOC as well as with the state's attorney's victim notification process. And I know we had Joanne on justice oversight, and there seems to be some issues with our notification system on both ends, on the DOC's side as well as the state's attorney. And we just want to do a little digging into this and see if there's anything we can do to have these systems work more effectively, be more sensitive to the victims, and give timely updates that are appropriate for that particular situation. So anything you could offer to help us would be terrific. So welcome, and if you could identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee. For the record, my name is Jennifer Pullman. I'm the director of the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. This is my first time in the committee this year. Thank you. And for those of you who do not know, the Center for Crime Victim Services, state agency with no state employees. So we're one of 5 agencies apparently that exist in the state. I believe we were set up by Governor Dean, who was interested in more state agencies, but not more state employees. So we're really not wanted anywhere, except for here today, apparently. But thank you very much for your time. We do at the center operate the Victims Compensation Program, the restitution program. Most pertinent for you all is that we have over 260 different sub-grants that go out into your communities to support victim services. A variety of different programs that we support. With respect to the systems and with respect to the offenders that are involved in those systems or defendants, I just want to really be clear that no one cares more or is invested more in ensuring that the offender in this case who caused that harm is at a decreased risk to do that again. Nobody cares more about that than the victim. That risk is decreased for the community and for others. Everybody, they all know 99% of Vermont offenders are released back into the community. And I have had the honor to work with many victim survivors who have somehow found the strength to put, as they call it, purpose to their pain, who advocate within the system and outside of the system to make change. And I really want to underscore, and this committee and Madam Chair has been very respectful in allowing a place for these voices at the table. Because the victim's voice, again, is one that is so heavily invested in making sure that this doesn't happen to others, doesn't happen into our communities. And can create much better outcomes, can create that level of transparency and trust in the system that sometimes we hear when we read the Digger or we read the papers or we hear from our community members, what's going on, and they don't trust it. Having victims have a seat at that table can improve all of these outcomes. And just really want to make that clear. I think sometimes when we think about victims, we think about survivors, people can often think like that their happiness or satisfaction with the system depends on what the outcome is. But we know that in fact is not the case. The National Crime Victims Legal Institute did a national study across this country and asked victim survivors, what was the number one factor that you felt impacted your satisfaction with the system? And overwhelmingly, the answer was that I felt heard. felt heard in a meaningful way, not that the person got X number of years, those pieces, but that they felt heard. And again, I really want to thank this committee for allowing for that. And I really want to continue to advocate for a system that provides for that. Madam Chair, I know that you have limited time.
Take as much time
Okay.
as you need.
But the context for this conversation that brings us here today really came about in this committee with a conversation about expanding learn time and earn time. Would it be appropriate for me to spend a few minutes on earn time and learn time?
Yeah.
Well, this is certainly something that I could talk about for quite some time, and I will not. I will speak in broad brush strokes, and I want to borrow from Attorney Nagarovsky, who presented before the joint committee, and he framed this in a really, I thought, helpful way. Because when we think about earned time and the expansion, there's the merits versus the logistics. And the debate about the merits has been had in this building many times. And I will speak briefly to the merits, but it's the logistics that needs the attention. And that's what this conversation that happened last year created the vehicle for this really critical conversation that's focused on the logistics. So as I said, I will be brief on the merits, but I would not be myself if I didn't touch upon them. So you all have probably heard that 99% of our cases resolve in plea agreements. And those plea agreements are entered into with the input of the victim, the involvement. They have a right to notification, right to input, and a right to be heard in the more serious crimes. And many victim survivors choose that option because the plea agreement offers that victim survivor the ability to avoid a trial, the uncertainty of a trial, to avoid having the details of what was the very worst day of their life. And played out in a court, played out in a newspaper, played out for everyone to be a part of. So that plea agreement, the victim chooses in 99% of those cases because they can avoid all of that. And in exchange, they get the certainty. So they don't roll the dice and go to trial. And they get the certainty that in this agreement, this is what the person will serve. So in my head, I think of it as a contract. So the victim gives something up in exchange for getting something which is so important, it's certainty. And I'm going to share with you a couple of statements that some survivors have made about why that certainty is so important. One survivor that I work with spoke about the sentence her stalker received. It was a 10-year sentence, the longest in the country. And she said, I know I have 10 years. After that 10 years, I'm going to have to uproot my life and start all over again. But she knew 10 years, I can go about my life. I can resume what I was doing before this person took that away from me. But then she's very resolute, in fact, which is very upsetting in and of itself about the fact that after that 10 years, she's going to have to rebuild. You've heard already a little bit, but time and time again, I hear a sentence needs to be a sentence at some point. At some point, it needs to mean something. And when we move those goalposts, we create a system that adds additional layers of trauma. And it does create more distrust in the system amongst the victims who are directly impacted, but also amongst our community. So that moving the goalposts, and it also creates, I've heard from some victim survivors, it's like, why bother? Why did I bother going through all of this? And we don't want to create that kind of feeling about our system, but to come forward, right? That's why we have it, so that communities will feel like they have a place to turn to.
Jennifer, can I just interrupt, because I had to scoot out for 1 second. I want to go back just for clarity. 99% of the cases are resolved in a plea deal,
Yes.
which the victim has to sign off on.
If it's a serious crime, yes.
They have to agree. Are they told at that point that there is earned time that the particular person could earn, and that the end date of their sentence could be different, would be different? Because that's was our understanding.
Before I address that, I want to correct myself. They do not have to sign off on the plea agreement. They get to have input, and they are to be asked by the court if they have an opinion on the plea. So there are times when a prosecutor will decide that maybe don't have the evidence and will enter into that plea, and a victim will object. But the victim has that right to present that objection. As to your second question, or to your question, Madam Chair, I think that it certainly in statute, under 28 VSA section 8818, the Department of Corrections does have the obligation to notify victims of the earned time program.
Right, but I'm talking.
When the sentence, yes, at the
When there
plea,
is a sentence and there is a plea. Is the victim notified that, yes, this person will qualify for earned time, so the release date would be different would be sooner than what you're seeing now?
yes, as I believe this committee heard last week from attorney Leaders Dumont and several victim advocates, they do their best to provide a forecast for what that could look like for the victim survivor. So again, it's a forecast that depends on some intervening variables occurring or not occurring.
So the victim knows that even though the sentence is, say, for 5 years, 5 min, 10 max, that with earned time, that 5 years could be 4.5 years.
Yes, and that is a change that this committee made several years ago in terms of moving forward, so that there would be that obligation to make sure that there is that warning. Yes, it's 10 years, but it might not be. So that was very much appreciated by the victim survivor community.
I wanted to put that out on the table because we have some new members here. I wanted to be clear that our goal was that when this is done through a plea deal or sentence, the victim is notified that, yes, there is earned time that will be applied to this particular sentence. So though you may think it's 10 years out, it may in reality be 9 years or whatever, so that they are notified upfront. So they don't have that false sense that it's longer than what it really is. Just wanted that to be clear for folks.
Just wanted to bring forward a couple of quotes from some victim survivors that I work with who are not present, but I do want to carry their voices forward. One young woman who this chair has heard from before, she was sexually assaulted when she was 12. And when I spoke with her about the potential for an expansion, what she told me was, and she gave me permission to share this, is I don't have the luxury of behaving in the way I'm supposed to or obtaining a degree so that my trauma goes away earlier. I don't have the ability to reduce my survivor sentence. And again, when I think about the certainty piece, and again, I'll ask Madam Chair's forgiveness, but I am going to speak to comments that were shared with me by Ned and Joanne Winterbottom, the parents of Laura Winterbottom, who was brutally murdered in Burlington almost, back in the 2000s. And what her dad said was that we're serving a life sentence because of the loss of her. And he really underscored for me that importance of the knowing and the certainty that would allow them time not to focus on the person who did this to her, but to focus on themselves, on their grieving, and on finding a way to honor her and devoting themselves to preventing crimes like this from happening in the future. And they have done just that. So when I bring up pieces like this that, that are being proposed or thought about in the past, her mom said to me, she's comforting me, she said, it's okay. I've gotten used to the fact that I will continue to fight this fight on Laura's behalf for the rest of my life. So I really do want to underscore the importance of some level of certainty so that victims and survivors can grieve and heal, honor, and also to plan and prepare. And that really brings us to the logistics piece that's so important and really why you invited me here today. The planning and the preparation and the knowing. As Madam Chair said, we're really trying to underscore that victims should not be thinking 10 years means 10 years. It does move constantly. And that's why the notification system is really at the crux of all of this and how we decide to move forward as a state. At the time that earned time was discussed, I believe that, and I wasn't in my current role, but that the legislature believed that the victim notification system was this kind of this panacea that could be flexible, could be nimble, could meet the needs of individual victims and not think of victims as a monolith because they're not. And what we've learned over time is that that is not the case. And so really making sure that we pull people together to make it the case. And there are many problems with our system. We heard that last week. And I certainly, joint legislative oversight, heard that. And I'm going to talk about some of those problems, but the good news is I believe that it's fixable. I believe that there are capacity pieces that can be fixed, and I believe that there are training components that need to happen that can make it better. Because right now, and I believe there's a question last week that was asked as to, is it a human error? Is it technology? What is it? And I think it is sort of that perfect storm right now where we have a system that has the capability, but we're not utilizing it. And we don't have proper training for the folks who are, who are interacting with that system all along the way. So again, in hearing, you heard from the state's attorney's advocates that it's not working. I can tell you that advocates across the spectrum, whether they be in law enforcement or the Attorney General's office, would all say the same thing. It's not working, but it can work. And the good news also is that all the advocates have the same goal in mind. We all want victims to get this information as they choose to receive it. What advocates have shared with me is that the current system, they described it as a blunt tool. That it is, that sometimes the letters are often sent out without case specificity, that they're simply blank. Sometimes letters are sent to victims that are not the victims on that actual case, or that remain in the system and it's on a completely new case that happened subsequently. That, and I know this from some advocates who sign up for Vines themselves so they can see what the letters are looking like that they get. The system, as you heard mentioned last week, only accommodates Spanish speaking and does not accommodate currently any other languages. And in Vermont, Spanish is not the predominantly non-English speaking language. So there needs to be some change around that. Also, in looking at the materials, I must say that I count myself as having a couple of different degrees. I shut down after the second sentence because it was too much. And you have to think about the fact that people who are accessing the system are in a tremendous amount of trauma.
So what do you mean by too much? Is it the language that is
It's the
trying
language.
to understand the legalese of the language?
Yes. I'm just looking for the example that I have. And again, this is all started this conversation that is very helpful to have, and everybody has been engaged, but this is just your font, as you can see, the amount of information is something to be handed out to victims. And so, for example, the Center for Crime Victim Services, we vet all of our materials through Disability Rights Vermont. We want to make sure that the font is appropriate, that the readability is there. And so in conversation with the Department of Corrections, we made that recommendation as well. We need to look at what are we handing to victims and is it really accessible in terms of reading it and understanding it. And then the other piece that's really important is bringing back that menu. And I know you heard last week from the Department of Corrections. And I really, appreciate they do a lot with a very small staff, very small victim services staff. But the well-intentioned idea that we don't want to overwhelm victims with this menu. We don't want to give them too much information because it could be traumatizing. And I'm sure that it is, but that is where they're at anyway. And for some victims, they may say, nope, I don't want to know anything. Other victim survivors that we work with, no, I want to know. I want to know each month if that person is getting time off. It makes me feel safe, or if I have this knowledge, if I possess this knowledge. And so, we know in the world of victim services that one of the most important things we can do, even if it's small, in terms of helping somebody to heal and move forward, is to give them a chance to restore some of their agency, to give them some choices, because they've been placed in this situation through no choice of their own. And then the criminal justice system is really not about them. It's about the state versus the person who's allegedly caused the harm.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the most important pieces for me about moving forward is creating this menu again, so we don't decide that victims should get nothing or victims should get everything, but we give them that chance to exercise their own agency and decide what exactly do I need, and if it's too much, then it's too much, and I opt out. And I know that the conversation is moving in that direction, and I'm really thankful for that.
So Jennifer, can I just interrupt here? When we were talking about the blunt tools and how victims are notified with the letters, and it could be the wrong case, it could be the wrong person, hard to understand, hard to read, not appropriate language possibly that's used. Is that coming from DOC, or is it coming from the state's attorney's piece of victims notification? Where is it coming?
Well, it's a national, I actually have to confess if it's Vans or Vine or whichever one, or Vine, but that's a national program.
Right.
And so it's really, I think, not that it's coming from DOC per se or the state's attorneys. The product is provided to
The
DOC.
product, but it's DOC that contracts for the product. So it's coming from DOC
Mhm.
for notifying the victims. Now, is it coming to notify the victim about the earned time that the person has earned? Or is it also the person has a new violation? The person has been reincarcerated? Is it also doing that as well?
Mr. Dano can correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, with respect to the earned time piece, that obligation, and you heard this last week, is on the victim to find that information out by going onto the website. The department has an affirmative obligation under 2818 to provide that information to the offender, but it is silent as to the victim. So the victim, and this is where the savvy victim comes in,
Yes, the victim
has to be the savvy victim.
needs to decide how often they want to be notified. It could be monthly, it could be every 3 months. Because we put that in the statute so that they're not notified every month unless they really want to be.
But they're not notified of earned time. That obligation is completely on them to seek that information out.
So if they don't seek that information out, do they get automatic notification or they get nothing?
To my knowledge, that is not what is they receive notification on, for example, if somebody's being released or if somebody's being transferred. But as to the earned time piece, my understanding is that solely lives on the Vine website. And that is updated every 15 minutes, as you heard last week. But again, the obligation is on the victim to find that information, find a computer, find internet, go and access that, versus what currently exists with respect to the offender, where there's that affirmative obligation on the department to provide that every 90 days at least.
Sure.
I'm just curious to know how customizable that stuff is, the language used, the delivery of it. I'm also curious to know if we've done any quality control sort of survey. That's for DOC, I think. Like, how often do we get feedback about, right? This is hard to hear. And I worry that I don't want to jump right into problem solving mode. So I guess like, what's the data? How customizable is it? The language we use, and how we deliver that, and what sort of quality control data do we give to, or does DOC collect and review?
I can't speak to the second question, but I can speak to my knowledge of the first question, which is how customizable. When we had a meeting in September that Department of Corrections arranged with the vendor themselves, there are a lot more ways that we can be customizing this this program. So I'm very hopeful about the direction that we're going in. They can add more languages. They can create this menu of options. So it's really the opportunity is there, which again is what makes this such a hopeful conversation. The opportunity is there. It's just a matter of the commitment and continuing to have the partners at the table having these conversations, so that when we do it right, and we cover all these different pieces that folks with different sets of eyes are catching. But I don't know if I spoke completely correctly, or
I'd have to confer with Meredith and our services. I don't know the answer to those questions.
You don't know about quality?
I don't know.
Either. Okay, thank you.
A really basic question. When an individual is sentenced, can you not calculate the best case, worst case scenario? So if the victims are being given that information, and they can either agree with it or disagree with it, that shouldn't be a surprise to them when the individual is released. Would you agree with that?
yes, presuming that is conversations happening, it shouldn't entirely, but for folks who have a long sentence, it could very well be a surprise that somebody is getting out at their absolute minimum. So I think it's just something that ability to plan and prepare and giving people some sort of notice to be able to do that. We have small communities. It's always going to be a surprise. So to the extent that we can do what amounts to simple things in terms of building a better system to make that happen better in a better way, I think makes sense.
Okay, but they
Yes.
they do know.
They do the best that they can.
They may
Advocates
be
do the
out
best they
in
can.
6 years instead of 7 years, so that shouldn't be a surprise if we need to communicate it well. And maybe it has nothing to do with this then, but as the individual is released from incarceration, is it not possible that they can have, and I don't know the right words, restraining order that says you can't go within X number of
Conditions of release.
conditions of release, right?
Yeah.
So, and I assume that happens too.
If they're still under supervision, they can.
Just don't want to assume.
No.
Two obvious things, but I mean, okay, thank you.
Barry, then Connor?
If the victim does decide to go on the website to see what the status is the programming easy to get into and out of or not?
That's a great question, and I actually haven't even thought that far to go and check it out myself. I suspect that, the Department of Corrections advocates or state's attorneys advocates would be best able to, but for me, it's that threshold point. It's the obligation being on the victim to go and do that and find a computer even for some, and find a safe place to access that information.
Right.
And couldn't we just do it a little bit differently?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's really alarming that the system isn't working, but I can't help but think, when some of the victim advocates from the state's attorneys came in, they were talking about these caseloads of 600, and part of me thinks almost like the system should be secondary because you should have a relationship with maybe someone in these office, like, if you just look at the job description, provide an emotional support. So there should be that line of connection already, but how could there be with like 600 caseloads? So I'm just wondering, like, what is the right size for that? What should we be doing on that front? And I know it's separate from the system that we got to fix, but that just kind of sat with me for a while after hearing them testify the other day.
Yes, and actually, there's a study from California that was done, which suggests that the average caseload should be more around 300. And because certainly having a well-built system is great for that, that's your catch-all, right? That's your safety net. But we would never want to go down the road where we eliminate the person's connection. So I'm thinking great safety net, and I'm thinking more resources for DOC, more resources for the state's attorney's office to have advocates who can continue to have that important function of developing a relationship with people. You know, when you're a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, aggravated assault, or a survivor of homicide, that robotic call is really never, ever going to cut it.
So you would say we'd almost need to double that number of victim advocates to get down to that 300 from the 600 now, yeah?
I do think that we need more victim advocates, both the state attorney's office and at the Department of Corrections. I've always been really clear that I support more resources from both those departments.
Great, thanks so much.
Do those two, the victim advocates on the state's attorney's end and victim advocate and DOC, do they connect and speak to each other? Right?
As far as I know, they do, and they have very good relationships. It's just a matter of, again, finding that time, caseloads, but conversations like this one that has been generated are also great to kind of take them out of that constant mode of having to react to thinking about how we can work together to be proactive. And that's a conversation everybody likes to have once in a while.
So let me read for the committee what's in law in terms of victim notification for earned time.
Mhm.
This is what we put in to make sure that victims are notified when a person's receiving earned time. DOC would ensure that all victims are notified of the earned time program at its outset. So that's when it first starts while they're in DOC. And made aware of the option to receive notifications from the department. So that's what you were saying, it's up to the victim to connect with the department after the department has notified them that the earned program has started for the person who's incarcerated. And what the department needs to do is provide timely notice, not less frequently than every 90 days to the offender, anytime the offender receives a reduction in his or her supervision. So that's notifying the offender. And then that's the only, then it says also the department would record any reduction in an offender's term of supervision on a monthly basis and ensure that victims who want information regarding changes in scheduled release dates have access to such information. So Jennifer, what you're saying for the victim to have access to that information that pertains to earned time, that it's up to them after they've been notified by DOC that the earned time program has been initiated. It's then up to the victim to notify DOC the option to receive those notifications.
Yes, and my preference would be that in the same way that the department has an affirmative obligation with an offender, that if the victim chooses to receive this information, that there be that affirmative obligation as well for notifying the victim. So if you're notifying the offender, hand in glove, at the same time, if the victim chose, notify the victim.
Yeah, we have this, they notify the offender not less frequently than 90 days. I thought we also had that for the victims,
I thought we had added that.
90 days. Did that get changed?
It wasn't, I looked it up and that's what it said.
I know, but
This
when
is-
we originally
yeah.
did this, we
So
were
somebody-
very clear that some victims didn't want to be notified every month.
Certainly.
And but we thought at least
Their choice.
some check-in every 3 months. But this language only pertains, that
Yeah.
90-day only pertains to the offender being notified.
Would it have been changed in another committee?
I have a question.
Yeah,
It's, I know we talked about this before. What are the offenses or is there offenses that
disqualified.
disqualify? I know we talked about it, just having a
It's
brain
right
cramp.
here.
That's retroactively. So this,
That's retroactive, but it's also going forward too.
No.
No, see, that's where
Oh,
we
yeah,
have
yeah,
the
yeah.
confusion. It's retroactive for this because of the way it was carried out, it was like, boom, all the victims got letters. Oh, this person is now qualifying for earned time, and everything just blew up.
Yeah.
So what we ended up doing is for that particular time frame, from the time that earned time became effective to the time we could kind of correct this, there were some offenses that we deemed, and some of them were murder, voluntary manslaughter, kidnapping, lewd and lascivious with a child, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault of a child. So for anyone that in January of 21, I think it was 21, we were doing this because we're all on Zoom, had been sentenced to, with those crimes, would not be eligible going forward to receive earned time.
But they had been.
Because it all got rolled out all at once. The victims, the way it was notified was
Yeah.
not done very
Right.
well. So there was a real groundswell of concern and anger, and this is how the legislature dealt with it. It went through Senate Judiciary Committee, went through our committee, and then the differences were negotiated between the two committees, and this is what we ended up with. It's not going forward for those particular crimes because those court trials or plea bargains that were then made after June 1st of 21, people were very clear that earned time was in place and that would be calculated when there is a sentence. And the testimony we received and what we were thinking as committee was at the time of sentencing, the victim will be notified that this person, regardless of the crime, would be qualified for earned time. So even though the sentence is 10 years, they could be released in 8 years. Because
Except for
going
those.
forward, no, those would still qualify for earned time. It was a carve out. It was a carve out for when
Previous, okay.
previous,
Yeah, that's
because
right.
there was no notification whatsoever. Once earned time became the law, going forward, people should know it's the law.
Yeah.
So
remember
then
that.
that would be in the conversation with the victim when there's a sentence. That, hey, this person's gonna earn some earned time. So even though the sentence may be 10 years, it may be 8 years. Because the person may earn all this earned time. The person may not earn all that earned time either. But good. So the thinking was on the legislative end, at least the victims would be notified at the time of the plea deal, the sentence, that, hey, this person's gonna qualify for earned.
So there are no exclusions.
There's no what?
There are no
Carve outs. or-
Carve out.
there are no exclusions for those who can earn time.
Going forward.
Going forward.
So in theory, in practice, you could be a child molester and get earned time in prison.
But I said,
Just to add, and the department created a sentence computation unit, which I think is about 5 or so folks to kind of crunch the numbers, because you can imagine with thousands of people in custody, potentially, there's a lot of math that goes into that based on their DR, if they made a DR, then they don't get the earned time, and then calculating the release dates. That's why even for the sentence population, that release date is somewhat of a moving target depending on their behavior while incarcerated.
it's based on their behavior while they're incarcerated. They've already been punished for their crime, but while they're incarcerated, it's based on their behavior. The other thing too that plays into one sentence is credit for time served. The victim should be notified of that because they could be detained for 2 years or 3 years, and that's all going to count towards the sentence. So if they've been detained for 3 years and they finally go to court and their sentence is for 10, they got 7 years left because 3 years already been counted towards their sentence. So that also needs to be made clear to the victim as well.
Can one accumulate earned time while being detained?
No, well, no, because they're not sentenced,
Right, they're not.
Just, it's only post-sentence.
Yes,
but they're getting time.
They get their regular time, but there's no acceleration.
Served. Right.
Yeah.
But you also have to consider that in the sentence, and people may not understand, I'm not disparaging any victims, but there's so much emotion going on. They may not comprehend as well that that person was held as a detainee for 3 years before they went to court. That 3 years counts towards their initial sentence.
Mhm.
So they could have a 10-year sentence. They've already served 3 years, so they're down to 7. And then with earned time, that could be 6 years, possible for that. But it's a mechanism for DOC to control their beds and the cost as well. Now, even though someone may have reached their minimum, say their minimum was 10 years, and they reached it in 7 because they had time for credit time served and earned time. Even though they've reached their minimum, it doesn't mean that they're going to be furloughed or paroled. They are eligible.
that's true.
They are eligible. Doesn't mean that they're going to get out. They might under furlough or they might under parole. Will and then Joe?
But remind me, earned time also does go towards the maximum sentence
Yes.
as well. Okay.
And Joe?
The testimony we saw regarding I think the parole board, is that they might, and they probably will. That's the most likely outcome based on the data we were shown.
That's true.
That's a parole board that makes that decision, not DOC.
Correct. But regardless, it's a likely outcome that it will be granted.
Thanks.
It's really not, it's about earn time, but I don't get a lot of time to say this, so I just have a real serious problem with certain crimes being eligible for earn time. And, rape is way different than stealing a bicycle, but.
Stealing a bicycle, you wouldn't be
Well, I
incarcerated.
was using that as whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's just crimes that just are just so above. Anyways.
So what other recommendations are there? Because we really need to look at this victim notification. And I know some of it is with the VINE system in DOC. And I know that there's stuff on the victim advocacy, victim services and state's attorneys, that even they themselves have a hard time keeping, its caseload is part of it, but there's a system there that just isn't working.
I think that, again, the conversations that have been fostered through this piece that was in miscellaneous corrections bill last year are really important. And I would certainly ask that this committee consider putting in similar language this year with a report to Joint Justice Oversight for mid-November, because I think conversations just are starting, and I feel like you all have a tremendous amount of power. And if folks know that they have to answer to you all in the future to provide an update, I think that would be really important in
Is that
terms.
from that ad hoc group that's
Yes.
working? And who is in that ad hoc?
That's the Department of Corrections, the state's attorneys and sheriffs, victim survivors from the council, the Center for Crime Victim Services. Those are the current members that are actually by statute were required to be consulted. I think certainly if there are other entities that this committee would think would be appropriate, but those are the sort of the core individuals or entities that really should be certainly at the table to try and hammer some of this out. And
So do you see any recommendations at all coming from them during this legislative session, or is it going to be more for next year?
I had hoped for some recommendations for this session, but I'm not seeing those have materialized. I certainly would like to think that there's going to be recommendations for additional service it for additional advocate hours. As you know, the Department of Corrections has 5 victim services specialists who have a lot of responsibilities. I think having more positions, I'd like to believe, would create more conversation, would create more proactive outreach for with victims and survivors. I think everybody at the table really has the same goal. It's just a matter of, in some ways, resourcing it. There's a training component that needs to happen, and I'd like us to be reporting back to Joint Justice Oversight about what that training piece is, because the human error piece is very, very real in terms of how codes are put in that trigger really different notifications than what should have been gone out. We've heard from victims that have gotten the code, gotten the letter that the person was released, and they're like, oh my gosh. And it's like, no, they were just transferred. One situation where the information was never placed in, the person was released from jail. And Madam Chair heard this story, and the person showed up at the victim's house, beat her up and raped her. So there are human error components that we need to work on as well. So it's a system, it's training for the humans. And again, keeping this working group together through legislative oversight would be really important, considering that affirmative obligation on the department would be helpful as well in the meantime. And, I think all of this is really doable. I think it's just system is there, just needs to be built up.
So how do we keep this group's feet to the fire so we can do something this year?
This year, I don't see any reason why you couldn't just simply require them to report back within the next few months as to what specific. I have my specific goals in mind, but I'm unfortunately just the head of a state agency that has no state employees and no oversight ability. So having a requirement that they report to either this committee or the judiciary committees or something with their recommendations.
Could I ask that that happens so that we do have some kind of understanding by this group where they're at, or is it just sitting there?
What I'm wondering is, you had some recommendations. You had a list of recommendations. There was training capacity that I'm wondering if a few members of the committee would be willing to work with you to figure out what items need to be addressed. And also figure out how we could keep the ad hoc groups feet to the fire, and then come back to us in a couple of weeks with some of those recommendations. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and I would be thrilled because this has really bothered me for years now, and I'm so grateful that the legislature is really focusing in on this particular aspect of victim
I
services.
volunteer
I would
to be
love
part of
that.
that.
It's not a whole jump. I'm thinking maybe 3 people.
Being that I asked, I'd like to be on it.
Mary, Kevin, Sean?
Yeah.
Of course.
If you could go figure out, we've got to go on the floor, figure out a time that you can sit down with Jennifer and just kind of
Phone number.
go, we'll figure it out right now in the hallway when you can.
I'll be on YouTube. I'll get all these calls.
Because our committee time is getting precious.
I appreciate the time very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you. We're gonna get off of YouTube, and then this frees you up if you could just go out, the more of you could go out and talk in the hallway and figure it out. So hang on, Sean. Let us get off.